Welcome to the Rare Earth Exchanges podcast, where power, politics, and the world's most coveted materials collide. Rare earth elements power the backbone of tomorrow's most critical technologies. With China dominating global production, the U.S. and its allies must align strategically to ensure a stable future. This urgency prompted tech entrepreneurs Daniel O'Connor and Dustin Olsen to launch Rare Earth Exchanges, a news and insight platform built to equip stakeholders and decision makers with the tools and intelligence needed to reduce dependency and build prosperous resilience. Let's get into it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rare Earth Exchanges podcast. You've got me, Dustin, and my illustrious co-host, Daniel. And today we have a very special guest, Bernardo. He is the CEO of Brazilian Rare Earths, and he's got some exciting things going on, and he's here to tell us all about it. So, Bernardo, to kick us off, we would like to know the man behind the name. So can you give us just a little quick history about your background, and then we can talk more about how you got into Brazilian rare earths?
Sure. And first of all, thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. And we love the podcast. So happy to be on. So my background, I was born in Brazil. However, I left Brazil very early. My mother decided to move to Indonesia, of all places, which we did. And very quickly, I realized I was not going to become a professional surfer and I wanted to go to university. So I asked to be sent to boarding school. And Perth, Western Australia, was the closest major city with decent English-speaking schools. And so I did my high school in Western Australia, then went to university in Western Australia, studied finance, ended up graduating with a PhD in economics. And I wanted to be a banker. So, straight out of college, I got a job with UBS, investment bank in Sydney. I was hired into their M&A team. First day on the job, they asked me where I was from. I told them I was from Perth. Perth, of course, is one of the biggest mining capitals in the planet. And so very quickly I got shipped off to the mining team because they had a big deal on and they needed somebody who knew what a resource was. And they thought that perhaps I would, given where I was educated. And the rest, as they say, is history. Getting into mining was very much by accident. And I've got to say, it's been the best thing ever because I really love it. Mining is real nuts and bolts. It's real, we extract things, we make things, and those things are used to make other things. And you can really see the fruits of your labor. So it's been a fantastic journey.
Wow, that's crazy. See, you travel like all over the world to get your education. That's fantastic. Great. So kind of the rest was history, but when did Brazilian Rare Earths come into the picture?
Yeah, so I started my career in banking, as I said, and that was in 03, 04, and sort of went through the end of the mining boom, which was fantastic. But then, of course, headed straight into the global financial crisis, which meant by 2009, I decided to leave banking. That's my version of it. Maybe my boss had a different version, but we agreed that I would leave banking. And I decided to go work directly for mining companies. Worked in Perth for a year and a bit, 2 years, but very quickly got a job as CEO of a tungsten project in Brazil. So I moved to Brazil and developed a small little tungsten mine. That led to a job as CEO of a gold exploration company, and then ultimately as CEO of an iron ore company, which I ran for 5 years. And that was a private company, which myself and my ex-wife and some other partners had bought out of administration, and it turned out to be a great success. But then my ex-wife and I got divorced. We remained great friends, but we agreed that probably I should find something new to do with my time. And that's how Brazilian Rare Earths came to be. I was, out of a job again and looking for something new and exciting to do. I'd spent over a decade at that point in Brazil, built up some amazing connections, knew the Brazilian market very well. I really like Brazil. I think Brazil straddles this really sweet spot. It's third world, so it's a country that still wants development to happen. Permitting is relatively straightforward compared to, say, Canada or the US, where permits can take decades. But at the same time, it's got a pretty well-established mining code. All the majors are there. It's got a pretty deep sort of talent pool for mining. And there's just a lot of opportunities. So we started looking around. I knew a geologist who had discovered Serra Verde. Serra Verde is the only sort of rare earth project currently in operation in Brazil. And he'd spent a good amount of time there developing that asset, drilling that out, and he'd built up a good knowledge base around how to look for these deposits. He knew of another area of Brazil which was completely untapped. There was nobody really there looking for rare earths. We believed in him, we backed him, we put our own money up initially, me and four other partners from Australia, very good friends of mine from Australia, that we decided to go into business together. And, we got lucky. First drill hole we put down, we hit mineralization, and we haven't stopped since. Very quickly after that, we started hitting some very high grade mineralization, which was very good. And that got the ball rolling. We did a private round, raised some money through friends and family. Then we did a kind of more external round, and that's where we got some really high profile investors coming in and raised a much larger amount of money that gave us time prior to IPO to really go and consolidate an entire province. I mean, today we've got over 4,000 square kilometers of ground. And so we really managed to consolidate this entire mineral province under one umbrella, under one company. And then that led to our IPO in late 2023, and that was hugely successful. Raised $50 million there, and ever since we just carried on drilling and developing this asset. And it's turning into an amazing deposit, really, and we're super happy. So that's the history.
Bernardo, before we get into more of a market topic, and more details, big picture, we're really excited about BRE. We've reviewed a lot of the analyst reports. We've spoken with experts. We really think you're onto something very big. Could you just describe for the viewers some of the characteristics of this deposit, like just how rich this deposit really is, and the size? It's the magnitude and the fact that you can potentially set up processing and you're near a port. Good to hear me?
Sure. I mean,
Bernardo?
we have a saying in mining that is grade is king, right? Because really mining is a very simple, if you really break it down, it's a very simple and
Dustin, are we there?
sorry, in mining that grade is king, because the higher the concentration of a given mineral, in a block of rock, the more economic it's likely to be to extract it. And so, higher grade typically means better economics, other things equal. And we're very proud to say that we have found grades that are just unparalleled, right? So we have found grades in our hard rock of upwards of 45% TREO. Now, to put that in context, the highest grade operating mines out there currently are like 5, 6, 7%, right? And these are world class. Now, there's developing mines that are much, much lower grade, a couple of percent. There's mines that are, where the grade's measured in ppm, where it's point something of a percent, and these are all considered mines. So what we have found is order of magnitude richer, which is really pleasing. And what's really interesting, it's that it's not just rare earths that we have found. So whilst the rare earth grades are very, very high, and the assemblage of those rare earths is very good. So we know what are known as the heavy rare earths in good abundance. We have the light rare earths and DPR in good abundance. But we also have a number of co-products that could prove to be very exciting. So, our uranium grades are about 2,000 ppm on average currently. And that's well above sort of, mineable averages currently. There's plenty of operations that are operating at much lower grades. We've got niobium grades that are significant. We've got tantalum grades that are significant. We've got scandium grades that are significant. We've got gallium grades that are significant. All these are critical minerals that, in large part been banned for export by China and dominated by China. So, what's exciting is that not only do we have very, very high grade of the rare earths, but we also have these potential co-products that could further enhance the economics and also further enhance the strategic attractiveness of the deposit. So that makes it really unique. And then, then the next question is scale, right? Because it's all well and good to have a small deposit like this, but what we have is a whole province. So what we're finding is that we have about 180 kilometer strike length of repeat occurrences. So we have our flagship project, which is Monte Alto, and that, I believe, is going to be the highest grade deposit in the world. Currently, the average grades certainly indicate that. However, that same style of very high grade rock is being repeated all the way along. The third important thing is, this is all well and good. Okay, you can have high grades, you can have favorable co-products and all this, but if you can't extract them, if the metallurgy is complex or difficult, then it is unlikely that you're going to be able to make a mine out of it. And we're very happy that in our case, the mineral seems to be relatively straightforward. It seems to leach relatively easily. I want to say relatively because nothing is easy in this industry. Of course, every project will have its challenges, but, we're finding that we need less acid, less intense conditions in order to leach these rare earth minerals. In fact, we have done most of our test work on direct leaching, which means we don't actually have to process it first and upgrade it to a higher grade, which invariably means you're going to lose metal through recoveries. We actually just took this hard rock, milled it, stuck it straight into a leaching circuit, and it seems to be performing quite well based on the work we've done to date. So all of those things together are all very encouraging. Icing on the cake is the logistics. Like where the project is just perfect. It's like near the coast, near ports, near rail. You got power, you've got a very large petrochemical complex down the road, which means, we can get reagents, we can buy acids relatively cheaply because the transport costs aren't as large. In fact, we could put our processing plant inside the petrochemical complex and save a lot of costs and have easier permits and things like that. So, it just ticks a lot of boxes. We're constantly looking for deal breakers, and I'm really pleased to say that we're yet to find anything that really scares us. It's a really exciting project. Like I said, it's got the potential scale to be a real game changer for the Western world. Now, there's a completely independent deposit committed any sort of offtake to, say, a Chinese buyer or anything like that. So it's still totally free and able to, supply the Western world, which we so sorely need.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you've got a lot of great things going for you guys. Could we focus or talk a little bit about on how you see BRE contributing to global efforts to diversify away from Chinese dependency that many countries have right now?
Yeah, we're quite lucky that we got very well backed early on. And I've got this thesis that, some people think it's a conspiracy theory. I really don't. But, if you look at the rare earth cycle over time, it's been very clear. Rare earth prices are very low. Then they go through this astronomical run, and everybody says, EVs are the future, and supply and demand imbalances are such that prices should be much higher because you're going to have this massive deficit and so on. And so that peak in prices leads to a massive influx of exploration dollars, and all these new projects are discovered. Those prices then magically come down and are crushed to the point where nobody makes money and every project starts to look difficult. And then these projects are all of a sudden bought by the Chinese. Case in point, peak last night, right? And then, then magically, 10 years later, prices come up again. And, this whole cycle happens again. So, at current prices, nobody's making money. Right. So I think where BRE comes in is, our grade and scale and logistics and, ease of processing is such that we're really hoping once all our studies are through, and, we've got to do a lot more work, of course, but we're really hoping that, our position on the cost curve is such that we become a little bit more resilient to these price manipulations, and therefore can emerge as a more consistent and reliable source of ex-China supply. And the fact that we're very well backed means that we haven't yet had to do, say, a long-term offtake agreement to then guarantee funding. And usually those agreements go to China. So, for example, Serra Verde, the only rare earth project in Brazil owned by an American fund, is sold a 20-year offtake to China. So MP Materials, until very recently, was exporting most of its material to China, I understand. So, it's all well and good to have the mining outside of China, but if all the material just flows back to China eventually anyway, then all you're doing is mining it for them, which is fine. Like, that's, it's reasonable. And to be fair, there's been nothing nefarious here, really. The reason why this is all happening is because the Chinese have paid the most and been the most proactive about it. Now, if the Western world wants to stop that from continuing, they've got to be proactive about it. As a company, we're here to maximize shareholder profit, right? So we're going to go and sell our product to whoever pays the most. Traditionally, that's been China.
Bernardo, I had a question, and
Very interesting.
I don't know if you all can hear me. I'm having some internet problems, but
at the same time.
Dustin, can you hear me okay?
Yep. Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, apology, guys. There's some issue with my connection. Bernardo, how do you compare what you have today versus the mines in North America? Let us take MP. Let us take that one they're developing in Wyoming. How does BRE compare in magnitude, potential magnitude, or even Linus in Australia?
Yeah, so I'd say MP Materials and Linus probably have the two best producing Western deposits today. They're relatively high grades. I think 5, 6, 7% sort of grade for both of those, depending on which reports you read, and of course what's published versus what's actually mined. Sometimes they can mine slightly higher grade portions of the deposit, but I understand those deposits to be very good. What those two deposits lack, however, is a significant amount of heavy rare earths. MP Materials has very, very little, if any. Lynas has a little bit more, but still is quite light on the heavies. We've got a lot more heavies, and I think that's quite important because it's the heavies that are the real rare earths, let's call them that way. And the light rare earths are a lot more abundant and can be sourced from other things like mineral sands and so on. So in a way, I guess that's one big differentiator. The other big differentiator is that those guys have a single mine. So, MP Materials has Mountain Pass and Lynas has Mount Weld, and those are single mines and they're great deposits, but they've been mined for a long time and they're becoming increasingly difficult. They're getting deeper, they're getting poorer. Lynas, had to put a lot of money towards upgrading their beneficiation plant recently because they're moving into a different mineral phase in their deposit and things were getting more complex. We're different. We have much higher grades for starters. However, we also have the heavies, which is very important, and we have an entire province. So we're going to have multiple mines, multiple deposits, a lot of optionality, whereas those guys don't. Also, from a logistics point of view, I'd say, we're better located than Lynas because Lynas is sort of stuck in, the Western Australian desert, and operating costs in both Western Australia and California, labor costs, environmental costs, all these things can be quite significant. I think once it's all said and done, Brazil may look to be a much cheaper jurisdiction to do business in terms of, much cheaper energy. For example, I think energy in Brazil is something like a fifth or sixth per kilowatt hour as it is in the Pilbara, Western Australia. I'm not sure about California, but I suspect it's not that cheap. So yeah, we differ on some pretty significant points. We aspire to be the next Lynas or the next MP Materials. That's how I'd say. And I think we've got the mineral endowment to get there. And of course, then move beyond it.
Great. So we saw
It's
that
an amazing
BRE
story.
raised, $80 million?
Amazing story.
Daniel's tweet is delayed. So Bernardo, you guys raised $80 million last year. Can you give us a sense of how you're allocating that capital?
Sure. I mean, most of the money goes into the ground. We're very, very disciplined about making sure that most of our exploration dollars most of our capital is spent, advancing the projects. We run a very light sort of corporate structure. In Australia, for example, we do not have offices. It's all virtual. All the team is in Brazil, pretty much. We make sure that most of the money is going towards either exploration, delineating Monte Alto and expanding Monte Alto, but also discovering new deposits. We have a very long list of new targets that we're developing, targets that are showing potential equal to, if not bigger than Monte Alto, which is very exciting. And then a lot of the money is going towards developing of, processing routes and understanding how best to extract all the value that's contained within this material. And that's a lot of work and quite complex. I mean, I think one thing that listeners should appreciate is how heterogeneous rare earths really are. No two projects are alike. There's no off-the-shelf solution for your project. Like each project is unique. And therefore, you need to spend time working out how best to extract value from that project.
Absolutely.
Dustin,
ahead,
I had
Daniel.
a few other questions. I turned my camera off, so I think it should be a little bit better.
Go for
So
it.
can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
So Bernardo, you had a big raise in 2024. You brought on someone from Neo Performance, I believe, correct?
One of our directors is also a director of Neo Performance Materials, Eric Noyes.
Okay, that's right. And, a little bit more detail. Other thing is, I think, did you sign some kind of deal with Bahia's Economic Development Secretariat? Is there any arrangements that you have with state authorities or federal authorities down in Brazil?
Yeah, no, that's right. I think what's been really pleasing, and at this point, I've been sort of running mining companies in Brazil for nearly 15 years. Across a number of commodities, like I said, tungsten, iron ore, gold. And I've never seen such political goodwill towards a commodity category as I'm seeing towards critical minerals. So, we have signed an MOU with the Bahia state government, and that's just intended to help us sort of fast track the project. And they're very keen, of course, to see us develop a project in Brazil. But I think even at a federal level, Brazil is just showing finally, because, historically Brazil has been a very extracting country.
Yeah.
We just dig up iron ore and send it elsewhere to make steel and then buy the steel back. And that happens across a number of commodities. But I think what Brazil is realizing now is it's a huge industrial country. If it can develop a critical minerals sort of processing capability, because it has a mineral endowment, but that's the hard bit to get, right? You can't just magically create that.
Yeah.
We were lucky enough to, to inherit that. Now, I think what the Brazilian government realized that if they can actually promote downstream processing, then that will unlock a huge amount of industrial potential in Brazil, right? So if Brazil can be a leading manufacturer of magnets in the future, well, then it can also be a leading manufacturer of robots and cars and drones and, all sorts of things that will flow from that. And that's where the real benefit to the country will be. And so, yes, we've signed an MOU with the state government of Bahia. We're in constant talks, at the federal level. And there's all these incentive programs being put in place. There have been funds set up dedicated to, investing in critical mineral projects, which of course we're bidding for. So that there's just a lot going on there. And yeah, it's really pleasing because it has not historically been like that. So we're really, really happy with the way things.
That's our understanding. We've spoken with other states in Brazil. There's a big interest, even in rare earth exchanges, our platform. There's in another state, Minas Gerais, I think it's called, on uranium. Can we talk a little bit about parallel energy and your holdings and what's the uranium situation?
Yeah, so our uranium endowment is significant. As a byproduct, we're likely to make, millions of pounds of uranium a year once we're in full production, I would guess. But Brazil, as a country, has historically not been great on uranium. So uranium in Brazil currently is actually monopolized by the state. So the Brazilian legislation says that you can mine it, but you have to sell it back to the state. Now, they will pay like a cost plus for it, so it's not full value. But our understanding is that that will change because they're just not able to source enough uranium that way. They need to incentivize, because it's not every mine like us that has uranium as a simple byproduct. Right? There's a lot of pure play uranium deposits in Brazil that will never get developed unless the private sector is incentivized to do so. So our understanding is that things will change in Brazil. We've heard a lot of rumblings from all levels, right? Very senior government officials, right down to sort of people that work at these agencies, that things must change. Otherwise, Brazil will never be able to become self-sufficient in uranium, which is a pity because we do have 2 operating nuclear plants and a third that's been built. It's not running because it can't get enough feedstock. So in our case, our uranium grades are so high that I'm convinced that, we'll make a real impact towards that energy need in Brazil. And globally, we'll probably produce more than what Brazil can consume and export it.
No, it's intriguing. A quick question on pragmatic pathways here. So if we look at path to production conservatively, Bernardo, if we look at timeline, milestones, and partnerships, high level, because again, I want viewers to know that this is very serious. You've raised a considerable amount, and there's going to be opportunity to take this to a level that could be globally a global apex of rare earth activity. So, at a high level, if things go according to plan, but be conservative, just what are we looking at in terms of the pathway for Brazilian rare earth?
Yeah, so really the real gating item is permits with all these things. It's how long it takes to get a permit.
Yeah.
We expect, we've applied, we're in the process of, applying for all the permits. There's various stages you got to do.
Yeah.
But we started early, we've been proactive. I'd say realistically, it will likely take another 2 to 3 years from now to be fully permitted.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a good outcome. Slightly faster would be an excellent outcome. Slightly slower would be a tolerable outcome. My expectation is sort of 2 to 3 years. And that's fine, to be honest. I think time is on our side. I think as time goes on, these things just become more and more critical. These deficits become bigger and bigger. And like I said, these things are very unique. It pays to do things carefully. But you want to make sure you develop your project properly so that, you don't waste shareholder money.
Yeah.
And commit mistakes that could be easily avoided if you just did a bit more studies. And a lot of the mining failures you see globally are from people rushing. Well, I need to get to market quickly. I need to be first. No, you don't need to be first. You need to be right. You need to do it properly. That's our view. But we are moving as quickly as we can. And the benefit of having done Brazil for the last 15 years, and my entire team are just the best guys I've ever worked with in Brazil, right? I went and cherry picked the best people I had ever worked with. My ex-wife doesn't appreciate that I poached some of our good guys, but that's what we got to do. To get things to move. And I'm confident that we'll deliver an excellent project in the right time frame.
Yes. So if you look at, and that makes a lot of sense, and we've gotten to know you. You have an enormous amount of experience, and from my standpoint, integrity, which is critically important. If we look at over the next, we've got permitting activity that might wrap up in a couple of years. That would be great. In terms of government deals, obviously you're open for business. Talking to the U.S., I think could be interesting because of the magnitude of the potential and the dependencies that we have. I'd like to get your perspective. I'm going to just sort of go in a different direction just for a minute. There's a frenzy up here right now, Bernardo. There's a frenzy. And, there's lots of deals happening. There's been executive orders, but there's no cohesive industrial policy. Okay. And it feels fairly sort of Wild Westy, So I think, your approach of being very methodical, going for the long term makes a lot of sense. If we look at partnerships and, your business development activity, I would imagine, are you looking to other Western companies to potentially sync up, or is it more country, or is it both? Are you open? Any preference there based on your experience doing this for, a couple decades now?
Yeah, look, to be honest, we're completely open to anything. I think a good deal is a good deal, right? And there's many, many ways in which we could develop. I think, I truly believe in not having to reinvent the wheel. So, we fully acknowledge and accept that there are companies out there that are way more sophisticated and are further along in terms of technical know-how. I mean, this stuff is all very complex. So we are in current discussions with a number of parties that could potentially be good downstream partner parties that have expertise in marketing or expertise in processing the stuff, or perhaps deep pockets and can provide some cheap financing. So there's a number of different ways we could do this, and we're open to everything. I'll be in the US next week. I'll be in Washington on Thursday. I've got a number of meetings, and it's just all about getting the ball rolling on these conversations. Like I said, we're very well funded. I've got $70 odd million in the bank. So we're not looking for money per se right now, and the caliber of shareholders that we have. I mean, we have really the who's who of Australian investors. We've got Miss Gina Reinhardt, who's Australia's richest person, is one of our
Yeah,
shareholders. She's
very
just,
familiar with Miss Reinhardt.
yeah, I mean, I don't know her, but she's just been a very, very supportive, fantastic shareholder.
Yes.
And we've got Whitehaven Coal, which is one of the biggest coal companies in Australia. And we've got very large funds, both American and Australian funds. And so the issue thus far has not been capital. But when it comes to developing this, where I think we could really benefit is perhaps with some strategic partnerships, people that can bring technical know-how and help us, avoid making mistakes that we would make if we went it alone. So that is, a potential pathway that we're studying. And now who that's with, we're open to anyone. It could be Japanese parties, Korean parties, American parties, Chinese parties. We're completely open. We're a very neutral company. Like I said,
Yeah.
we're here to maximize shareholder value. There's no ideological drive behind the company.
Understood. I appreciate that about you. One final thing, and I think it's a good question, just so that you can kind of summarize everything concisely and just quickly to the point. For questions, policymakers, folks up in the United States trying to better understand this whole world. Why should they care about what's happening in northeastern Brazil right now, Bernardo?
I think because it's one of the few credible, upcoming projects globally. I mean, most projects, if you do an analysis, most scoping studies are put out. They don't make money at current prices. They don't make money unless prices are significantly higher than current prices. And so, when you have a project that has great scale logistics and it's in a neutral jurisdiction, I think that becomes a bit of a prize. And if the Western world is serious about securing an ex-China supply of critical minerals, well, we own an entire province that could be a big chunk of that answer. And so that's why I think Western folks should care about what we're doing. And I think it's why we've attracted so much attention and done so well in such a short period of time. I mean, this company is only 4 years old, right? Most of my peers, their projects are decades old. I mean, Linus was discovered, I believe, in like the 50s, like 60s, right? And Mountain Pass, likewise, has been around for decades. So, we've really come on very quickly, and, it's all to do with the quality of the deposit and where it is and where it sits, and likely, the ease at which it can be developed compared to some of the other potential deposits out there.
Very good. And I might add, it's also the quality of the management, the experience, the wisdom, and we'll just give you that kudos. So, Dustin, I think we need to start wrapping it up, but this has been fantastic.
Yeah, this has been fantastic, and we are out of time. So, Bernardo, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you again on the show and maybe give us an update on where your project is at and go from there. So,
No problem, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll remain an avid listener. So
great.
keep up the
Thank
good
you.
work.
Grateful.
Thanks, gents.
Thanks.